Alex. So this week I'm going to be reviewing Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows by J.K. Rowling in anticipation of the movie that I get to see in 3 hours. 3, 2, 1, 2 hours, 59 minutes. In case you haven't guessed, I'm kind of excited. Do you remember when this book first came out and the news spent all their time talking about how kids had spent their formative years growing up alongside Harry Potter and that's why they felt so close to the series? Yeah, I was one of the kids they were talking about. I was 11 when I first read Philosopher's Stone and 17 when Deathly Hallows was first released. I can tell you where I was when Sirius Black died, when Snape killed Dumbledore, when Ron and Hermione kissed for the first time. I know it sounds like such a cliché, but I grew up with Harry Potter. So it's hard for me to subjectively look at anything in the series. The first time I read Deathly Hallows, I was just so relieved that everyone got out alive. Well, the trio did, at least. That I was able to forgive the occasional inconsistency or subpar prose. However, looking back at it now, there are a couple of issues I have with the book, and some pretty big ones. In case you've been living under a rock for the last decade, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows is the conclusion to the popular Harry Potter series. It's the final battle between Harry and his friends against the Dark Lord Voldemort. Harry, Ron, and Hermione spend the year traveling the English countryside looking for Horcruxes, which are pieces of Voldemort's soul that he took out when he died the first time, which happened like 7 books ago. It all comes to a climax at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where Harry and his friends return to fight Voldemort one last time. That was a really bad summary, but this book and this series have been so prolific over the last decade that it's impossible for you to have escaped pop culture osmosis, at least with the smallest details. So I'm going to try and look at Deathly Hallows on its own, as opposed to as the conclusion of a 7-part, mega-long series. Otherwise we'll be here all day. And although the first third of the book is pretty good, and the last third is pretty awesome, the entire middle of the book is dedicated to, essentially, Harry, Ron, and Hermione's camping trip. I mean, it does make sense that they have to travel around England to find the Horcruxes. I mean, they're not all going to be located, like, in the middle of London. But still, we don't need chapter after chapter about how wet it is and how much it sucks and how much they're getting on each other's nerves. Like, it can be summed up in a sentence or two. Although that also begs the question as to why Voldemort needed to hide his Horcruxes in England in the first place. Why couldn't he just, like, bury them in the middle of the desert? Good luck finding them. This might even be tolerable, except that the worst part is that eventually you find out what's been going on at Hogwarts while Harry and his crew were trucking around the countryside, and it's so much more interesting. I mean, why couldn't we see Neville and the other students rebel against the Death Eaters? I mean, it certainly would have been more interesting than reading about the long periods of boredom in between the brief seconds of excitement. And about those brief seconds of excitement, the whole thing about collecting the Horcruxes kind of felt like a video game, like you have to travel around and defeat all the temples to get the Triforce pieces or something. This is okay in a video game because the plot is second to the gameplay, and it's a lot different when you're actually flying through Gringotts on the back of a dragon yourself, or at least pretending to. A book can have a bunch of disjointed segments. Finally, a lot of the exposition just seemed to come out of nowhere. This is really weird for the Harry Potter series, which is usually very good at foreshadowing events books before they actually happen. I mean, Sirius Black shows up in the first chapter of Philosopher's Stone as a name drop, and then he turns out he's the primary antagonist of book 3. In Deathly Hallows, it turns out that wand lore, specifically the fact that a wand will bond to the person who defeats its owner in combat, is crucial to the final fight against Voldemort. And yet we don't find this out until a couple chapters before it happens, where it's dumped in as an entire paragraph. Even if you ignore the 6 other books where she could have introduced this, you still have, like, half a book where you could have gradually dropped hints. I mean, what else did they talk about when they're camping? Hermione could be researching wands or something. Yeah, I don't have a better idea, but I'm not the writer, damn it. There are also some weird cases of character derailment. The ones that really bothered me was Hermione's willingness to brainwash her parents and just send them off without their consent, and Lupin's sudden inability to cope with becoming a father and willingness to run out on them. Those came out of nowhere and kind of just seemed unethical, and they were really glanced over, and yet these are the good guys. Same thing when Harry used the Cruciatus Curse to torture a Death Eater because he spat on his favorite teacher. I mean, yeah, that's not very polite, but seriously, that's kind of overkill, and yet no one called him out on it. Besides, McGonagall's a badass. She can take care of herself. So yeah, those are my major criticisms. Oh, and the epilogue, but I'm not even going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Albus Severus? Seriously? And that's not to say that I didn't like the book. I mean, it did have a lot of good points. Like, a lot of the individual scenes were really well done. Specifically, the one with Bathilda Bagshot, where the snake comes out of her head, that creeped me the hell out the first time I read it. And in the first part of the book, where they're all at the wedding and just having a good time, and then Kingsley's Patronus comes out of nowhere and just says that they're coming, yeah, chills. Oh, and Malfoy's Manor when they were torturing Hermione, and at the beginning of the book when the Death Eaters murdered the Muggle Studies professor with a stripper name that I can't remember. That was good. That was the first time that we really see that the Death Eaters are really, really not very nice guys. But hands down, my favorite scene was at the end of the book when Harry is going to confront Voldemort and he knows full well he is going to die. I mean, I knew she wasn't going to kill Harry. I mean, you can't kill Harry, but just that scene where Harry wasn't being dragged to his death but was going headfirst into it. Just that one moment when Harry realized he wasn't going to be dragged to his death but was going chin up with dignity. That's why Harry Potter is a hero. And then the spirits of his parents appear and, okay, yeah, there were tears. Maybe I can't do this as unemotional as I thought I could. And honestly, as a Harry Potter nerd, I do love the ending. Not the epilogue, but the part before that when the sun's coming up and Harry's killed Voldemort and everything is good and the good guys won. And yeah, maybe it's unrealistic. Maybe Harry hasn't suffered enough considering he just went through the early stages of a war. But come on. Every now and then it's nice to just have one where the good guys win. That still doesn't excuse the cheesiness of the epilogue. So overall, this might not have been the best written book, and it's certainly not my favorite in the Harry Potter series, but sometimes it just doesn't matter. It's still an entertaining read and an emotionally satisfying end to the series, and sometimes that's all you can ask for. I'll give it 4 conveniently hidden Horcruxes out of 5. Alex, I'll see you next week, at which point I will have seen Deathly Hallows and gotten all the fangirl out of my system, and you will be reviewing Microsurfs. Until then, finite incantatem.